along. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. So my name's Kira and I'm the Marketing and Events Executive at the Entrepreneurship Centre. If you haven't worked with us before, I'll quickly introduce what we do. So the Entrepreneurship Centre is committed to fostering entrepreneurship both within the university and also the wider community. So we try and support individuals at every stage of the entrepreneurial journey. So that goes from helping aspiring entrepreneurs to get started, assisting those early stage ventures, and then supporting the growth of the small and medium-sized enterprises. By connecting industry with our student and staff community, we aim to create a dynamic and thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. We try to do this through a variety of programs. We offer one-on-one support and also events, and we hope that these provide you with the tools, resources, and guidance that are needed to bring ideas and research to life, as well as develop successful ventures and create that lasting impact. If you feel any of this resonates with you or you'd like to learn more about what we can offer, feel free to reach out to us after the session. I'll be emailing out all the contact details later for the Entrepreneurship Centre team and also Will and Jake themselves. So this Lunch and Learn is the first of a special three-part series showcasing how entrepreneurial thinking can thrive in unexpected places, from creative arts to STEM. Before I pass over to Will and Jake, who will introduce themselves, tell us a bit more about their entrepreneurial journeys, and also start the session for us, I'd like to remind you that if you do experience any technical issues, please do let me know via the chat. And there's also going to be time for a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to add your questions for Will and Jake throughout the session in the chat. I'd now like to hand over to Will and Jake.
Thanks, Kira. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I'm going to kick this off and then I'll hand it over to Jake, who's the star of this talk. Right, Jake?
We went over this. Now you're the star.
I'll start with who the heck am I? I am my name is Will Kegler, and my connection with St. Andrews is my stepdaughter Alex Flagg is a PhD student there. I love St. Andrews and have been there a number of times. Little background on me. I am a mechanical engineer. I have an MBA from university in the United States called Carnegie Mellon. And I have done a number of startups, which I actually kicked off with my program at Carnegie Mellon. So Carnegie Mellon was the first school in the United States to have an entrepreneurship program, and that's why I went there. Really great school when it comes to computer science and machine learning. And so while my background is mechanical engineering and I've worked most of my career in the medical space, most of my companies are actually software companies. I also, by the way, was on faculty until my latest company kind of became too big a job to do part-time. I was on faculty in teaching entrepreneurship in the business school at Carnegie Mellon. So I've been on the academic side. I've done 4 startups. My most recent startup is a company called Sovasage, which is a software company that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to help treat and make the lives better for people who have a sleep disorder called obstructive sleep apnea. I will get more into that, I'm sure, as Jake and I talk, but that's kind of a start off. And Jake, I'll let you give your background.
Amazing. Thank you, Will. I unfortunately don't have quite the lengthy CV that Will does. I only graduated from St. Andrews a year ago, 2024.
By the way,
so I've been out for a year.
I could say that's fortunate. You're a lot younger than me.
But yeah, so I've been living in London for the last year. Before St. Andrews, I grew up originally in New York and then moved to Connecticut. I'm half English, so I have some family in the UK. Kind of always wanted to sort of go back to the UK for uni and beyond. Decided to stay here. While I was at St. Andrews, I started a band called Bell Street Collective, and we played gigs in and around St. Andrews, playing some balls. We did a stint at the Fringe a couple years in a row. And then I started working on an app with my co-founder in the music industry to basically try and streamline the booking process for bands and artists. And so I was working on that for the final 2 years of St. Andrews. While everyone was off getting jobs at various investment banks and consulting firms, I was like, why don't we just try this? So when I graduated, pretty much moved straight down to London, had raised a bit of money in funding from the Scottish government. And again, we'll go through all this later, I'm sure. But that kind of gave me a few months of runway to try launching this music app in London. Long story short, it failed, and for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. And yeah, I've spent the last year in London basically getting some jobs, leaving some jobs, doing a lot of freelance marketing work until now I'm running a marketing agency while still keeping the music stuff going on the side. So I'm really excited to be here talking because I don't have the most experience in the world, but I do love the creative arts and I'm a musician. And so the kind of nexus of entrepreneurship and creativity is very near and dear to my heart. So yeah, it's really nice to be here and be chatting along with Will, and hopefully you guys take something good away from it. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. So this is how we're going to try to do this today. I like to call these fireside chats. I don't know where the fire is. Maybe it's over here outside of the camera, but it's really a conversation between Jake and I, and then hopefully the rest of you will join in with questions as well. So I'll kind of act as moderator just to kick us off, but it's really both of us going back and forth. And by the way, Jake talked about he has less experience, but I think this is very, very on the money in terms of what a student at a university like St. Andrews is exploring as they're thinking about what do they want to do with their future, right? So let me start off with this question for you, Jake. You mentioned your friends were going into finance, they're doing all these jobs, probably making a lot more money than you were in the beginning, right? So what made you want to get into entrepreneurship? Like, kind of what was your why for that? Because that's an unusual choice for many people, right?
Yeah, it certainly is. And I feel like it's getting better at St. Andrews, but especially when I started in 2020, I would say like the entrepreneurship program wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. And so that choice was kind of even less of a factor. To be honest, both my parents are small business owners. They work in the travel industry and both started their own companies. So I think growing up and seeing how much autonomy they had over their lives and over the way they could work, and obviously all the risks and rewards that come with starting your own business, I kind of got to see firsthand. So my mom does travel PR and my dad does like travel writing and marketing. So their love for travel and love of really the business that they work in was really contagious for me from a young age. And they got to set their own hours. And obviously they worked really hard at times and didn't have to work so hard at times, but that's what comes with the entrepreneurial journey. So I saw that kind of lifestyle and way of working and the satisfaction that they have starting their companies. And so I was like, I kind of knew I always wanted to do the same thing. But to be honest, I mean, I applied for a ton of jobs while I was at St. Andrews. I did everything I could try and get an internship in my third year, as everyone does. I ended up sending like over 100 cold emails to different climate tech companies because at that point I wanted to work in like sustainable consulting. I got one response, and this guy ended up giving me a hugely underpaid internship, but it got me to London and gave me the kind of internship satisfaction that I know a lot of us want in our third year. But yeah, so I'm not going to say like I didn't try to get a job. I certainly did. And maybe I would have gotten, if I had gotten some sort of IB or consulting internship, I would have taken it and had a very different path. But I think deep down, I wanted to just kind of send it and try something different. And look, like you graduate, I was 21 when I graduated. Most people are 21, 22, 23. You're so young. I seriously feel like there's kind of no reason not to take a leap. Because the worst thing that could happen is you go straight back to where everyone else is and join kind of a traditional job path. So that was sort of my entry. I'm not going to say it's been like wildly successful, but also it hasn't been super unsuccessful because I'm still like living, so it's okay. But yeah, that was me. And how about you, Will? What kind of tell me more about, you told us a bit about the path of starting Sova Sage and your kind of educational journey. What about you and your upbringing and maybe your nurture or nature has kind of pushed you into this level of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, wow. Mine's an interesting story, right? So I started out as an engineer way back in the Stone Ages. And I chose engineering as my undergraduate because I liked creating things. I liked solving problems. And I found engineering as kind of a cool way to do that and make an impact from that perspective. So when I graduated from my undergrad, that's what I focused on, being the best engineer I could be. And I did that for 10 years. Just, and I went and I worked for a big company. Actually, it was a small company that became a big company. And served a lot of different roles. But what I found as I did that and as I kind of grew as a person and as a professional was I wanted to increase the scope of exercising my creativity and solving problems and helping create things. And the next logical step for me was to build a company, right? So I didn't start out saying I have to be an entrepreneur. Mine was focused on being innovative, solving problems, making an impact. That focus in terms of where my emphasis was changed over time, and how I exercised it changed over time. So that's why I went back to Carnegie Mellon. I picked Carnegie Mellon because they had an entrepreneurship program, which many schools did not back in the 90s, the early 90s. Um, and, um, and then exercise that same kind of, scratch that same itch, if you will, by starting a company, right? So mine has always been kind of the joy of doing that, right? That's always been what my career is about. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's not much more to say about entrepreneurship than like basically solving problems, right? As an engineer, as an entrepreneur, your entire goal really is to find a problem, figure out how to solve it, and then go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you said, though, because I've talked about this in my classes here in the States. And sometimes, I'll be quite honest with you, sometimes students don't like it when I say this. But you said you could go out and do this, and you could always go back to the larger company and get a job. And that's absolutely true. Although, by the way, it's always hard to do that as an entrepreneur, because once you feel the empowerment of doing it yourself and picking your own path, it's hard to work for somebody else. It just
it's true.
But
for sure.
I will tell you, I worked for big companies before I did this, and I would always rather hire someone, even if they failed on their entrepreneurial venture, before I would hire someone who didn't have the passion and the initiative to go out and try to do it on their own. So it is a tremendous thing for your resume, even if you fail, but it will change you, right? And so, and the other part you said was do it when you're young. So I did my first startup when I was probably 34. Maybe it was a little
Still young,
but I was in my 30s, right? That's old. No, that's old for an entrepreneur, right? So I always say do it when you're young. That's something I definitely believe in.
But would you find starting a company at 34, like obviously you had 13 more years of experience than I did when I started my first company. So that also counts for something as well?
Well, yes. I mean, it certainly counts for something, although I will tell you this, and this is why I pause. So I when I have taught at the master's level and the undergraduate level. And one of the things that I often have my undergraduate students ask me is, should I dive right into this entrepreneurship, or should I go out and get a job and learn what business is like and then do it, right? And what I like to say is, if you need to go work for a big company to make some money because you got to bridge that gap, maybe pay a school loan, I get all that. Right. And that can make sense. But don't do it under the illusion that you're going to learn from a big company what it takes to do a startup, because they're two very, very different endeavors. As a matter of fact, when I started my first startup, I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned in the big company. It's a very different way of thinking. It's a very different way of building a product, building a company, and it's all about failing fast and rapid cycles of test, fail, adapt, hopefully eventually succeed. You're right in the midst of that right now, I can tell. And so that is not something, by the way, that fits very well in a big company, because big companies tend to be much more risk averse. So yes, the experience was helpful, but only to a point.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I firmly believe that the best way to learn how to do something is by like doing that thing, like reading a textbook to then theoretically transfer that information over to the real world, I think can be helpful, but it's almost like a form of procrastination from just doing the actual thing if you have the means to do it. And so I totally agree. Like, I think building experience in some realms is very helpful, but you're also going to build experience while you're building the thing that you're doing, right? Like, I learned more from 2 months of failing in London than probably years of working at a big company that were meant to teach me about entrepreneurship would have actually taught me. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Man, that's a great lead into my next question for you, because
Perfect.
I'll tell you my story, and then my question for you is similar.
Yeah.
So when I started my first, it was actually my second company, but really my first startup. It was called MedSage Technologies, and it was a software company. I went down and visited a potential customer in Florida. So, to give context for everybody in the UK, driving from Florida back to where I live, which is on the northern part of Pennsylvania, is probably most of a day's drive, 2 days drive, really, unless you drive all night. And I met with this customer, and the whole drive home was a soul searching where I said, okay, am I going to do this or not? Am I going to stop just doing an intellectual exercise and actually take the leap, quit my job and start a company? Or was this all just a fun thing to think about, right? And every entrepreneur goes through that. By the way, by the time I reached my home, I had come to the conclusion that I would rather try this and have failed than not had the guts to try it in the first place, right? So fundamentally, in the end, that was my decision point where I went forward and took the leap into entrepreneurship. So my question for you, and I know your first project, your music app, was something you started at school, which is great. That's one of the things I love to be a part of when I'm working with students. But what made you pick that? What was kind of the why behind why you picked that first project, and maybe talk a little bit more about what that project was?
Yeah, it's a great question because the why I picked it is also the predominant reason for why it didn't work. I picked it because I felt like I was the perfect customer for it. It was something I wanted to use. To give you an idea, the app was called Klank, and it was a booking marketplace that connected venues, so like pubs, bars, in the St. Andrews case, like ball conveners, St. Andrews Union, for instance, with DJs, live musicians, solo musicians, bands, orchestras, etc. And it also connected those two groups with fans who wanted to go see live music of some kind. So the idea was to basically centralize the live music booking marketplace and create an easier way for bands to be discovered, booked, receive payments, etc. So like I said, I was playing in a band at St. Andrews. The way we got booked was word of mouth, which is super unreliable, obviously, being found on Facebook or Instagram, and then getting kind of a random message from a person 3 years older than you who you never met before saying, hey, do you want to play at my event? And typically they wouldn't know how much to pay you, and you wouldn't know how much to charge, and you wouldn't know if they were going to give you cash on the day or never pay you at all. And I was like, is this really what every band goes through? Because this is what I was going through. And so started to do some research and ask a lot of my friends who were in music in St. Andrews and beyond. And yeah, it seemed like there was a huge problem there, and we needed kind of a more streamlined booking service. It's like, imagine before Airbnb trying to book private accommodation for like a weekend somewhere would be very difficult. Suddenly Airbnb comes and streamlines the entire marketplace. So in my mind, I kind of positioned my app as like, Airbnb's done it for short-term term rentals, Uber's done it for hailing a cab. Like, why can't we do it for music, basically? And so that was sort of the premise. And again, it was like the nearest, dearest thing to my heart because I desperately wanted something like this to book more gigs. The reason why, I don't want to jump ahead, but the reason why that was also the downfall is because I had so much conviction because me and my close circle would have used it that I didn't take enough time to do like proper market research before putting it out into the market. And so when I did put it out into the market and then realized, oh wait, I actually need to talk to like a lot more people, I started to realize that just because it would have worked for me in St. Andrews at that time in my career, it wouldn't necessarily work for kind of a mass audience. So yeah, failure teaches you a lot of lessons for sure.
So that's a really kind of important point, and I love the fact that you're willing to talk about what worked and what didn't work.
Oh, yeah.
For the audience, if you're thinking about entrepreneurship and you talk to an entrepreneur who's done it, if they tell you they've succeeded at everything that they've done, they're lying to you, right? They're not telling you the whole story. Every entrepreneur has failed. And by the way, if they haven't failed, they probably haven't taken enough risks and stretched enough, right? It's part of the process. It's actually, you have to kind of get used and comfortable to welcome that because you learn from every failure. So let's explore what you were talking about, Jake. So you found a problem. Did it help the bands in St. Andrews?
So
yours?
unfortunately, we were never able to launch it until I graduated. So our quote unquote MVP, which didn't even come close to the tech that we were actually trying to build, was basically manually acting as a booking agent, which obviously booking agents exist. So it wasn't extremely special, but in a place like St. Andrews, even manually booking bands for gigs was really effective. And typically venues or contacts I had made at balls, etc., would come to me. I would go find a band or a DJ and manually connect them. And so that was sort of the proof of concept. And I think in a place like St. Andrews, something like that in some capacity would still be very helpful. So yeah.
So you did kind of test it, but in a very manual kind of way, like you were the connection. Is that
I was
correct?
the connector. Yeah, it was very manual and it was very like geographically dependent. So St. Andrews is a bubble, as we all know. It's a very unique place, and therefore, what works in St. Andrews might not work in another uni town even, and definitely might not work in a place like London or New York or kind of one of these big music centers.
So what market research did you do, or did you do very little, and it was more about your personal experience that you built the first idea around?
Yeah, so what I called market research at the beginning was talking to probably like 10 DJs, 5 or so bands. And keep in mind, it's St. Andrews, so there's probably only like 5 bands in the entire town. Yeah, so talking to 10 to 15 musicians, talking to a few of the live music venues, so Union, the Vic, kind of names you guys would know in town, talking to heads of balls and heads of events. And because I didn't have an actual physical app for them to use, there wasn't much they could do except say, yeah, sure, like let us know kind of when it's coming out. And then when it was taking too long to come out and I started doing manual bookings, that's when they started to just kind of come to me, and I would, out of the goodness of my heart, like organize a band booking for them, and I wouldn't take any payment because honestly, I wasn't sure how to even like take payment for, like, I just felt like I was going to be like, that would be super rude if I had demanded payment for manually connecting these people. So it meant I wasn't testing the business model at all. So I had no idea what to price it at. So when I got to London, we launched it basically exactly a year ago. So in Freshers Week, came down to London because that's really where I wanted it to work. Because I thought, look, London takes up about 70% of the UK economy in many ways, especially in the music sector. It's by far one of the biggest live music cities in the world. If London works, in my mind, then if London worked, it would have worked anywhere. So coming to London, market testing literally meant drafting up a list of 100 venues and going onto every single one. And I called half of them. Most of them didn't even pick up my calls. The ones that did told me they weren't interested, hung up. The ones that didn't pick up my call, I cycled my bike to like 50 different places, pubs, nightclubs, random restaurants that didn't even have live music. And I was like, I think you should have live music and then you should use this app. And they were like, I don't know. And yeah, it was a weird experience. Like, again, the learning in that kind of week or two of cycling around talking to people was pretty crazy because most people don't give you any time of day at all. Most people are so stuck in their ways. And you really only get clarity about what works and what doesn't when your sample size is that big, right? It took talking to 50 plus venues. It took talking to probably 75 musicians to understand what worked and what didn't. And I really, really, really wish I had done that 2 years before, right? Before even building a product, I wish I had done that research because it also would have governed how the product looked. You know, there were things people did like, of course, but a lot of the aspects of the app, people were like, oh, I don't think this would really work for me. And then when you see a pattern there, you're like, oh, why hadn't I done that kind of research before even talking to a technical co-founder? Very eye-opening, I would say.
Yeah. So you talk about it, you're only a couple years into this, but you've learned a lot of great lessons already. So yeah. There's a couple of things, and then I'll tell you about my failure too, because we should both share our failures.
Of course,
I think you learn more from failures than successes, right? So one of the things that I heard you say was you went out to people in St. Andrews and explained your idea and asked them what they thought, right? Is that what I heard? Yeah. And one of the things I think there's two issues there. One is those people were probably your friends, right? Or you knew them at least. You had some relationship, right? So your friends treated you differently than the guy that owned the club in London, right? Because they didn't want to disappoint you and they didn't want to tell you your idea wasn't going to work for them, right? There is an indication. There is a tendency when you go out and talk to your friends that they're going to tell you your idea is great, right? Talking to someone you don't know at all, that's when you really learn whether your idea works or not. The second thing is, and this is something that is because I'm an engineer, I've learned the hard way, is when you're doing that very early market research, you actually shouldn't even tell them about your idea. What you should do is go to them and ask them what problems they're facing. Because it may be that you are solving a problem of theirs, but it may be fourth on their list. It's not the one they think of when they wake up in the morning. And even if they say, yeah, that is a problem, if it's not their biggest problem today, they may not pay any attention to it, right? So understanding the problem could take your product, like as you said, in very different directions, right? And that is a really healthy thing to do. I mean, my first startup, MedSage, started out as a medical device and ended up as a software company because people liked the device I built, but they weren't going to pay for it and they didn't want it, but they liked the software that accompanied it. And so I had to kind of very quickly figure out what a software company looked like, right? And if I hadn't done that, that company wouldn't have succeeded. So you've already learned some really great lessons there through that experience. That's fantastic. I'll tell you another way to fail because this is my experience. So I said I did 4 startups. The one in the middle was called New Care Solutions, and New Care was a cool idea, right? So what we did was we took this technology called Zigbee and built this device that monitored how patients were sleeping in assisted living and what's called dementia care. In the U.S., I don't know if they have this in the U.K., but they'll have specialty homes that are for people who have Alzheimer's and dementia who, just need to be in a safe environment. Problem is that they fall when they get up. They have UTIs. If they go into the hospital, they're very unlikely to make it back. It's just kind of a statistical fact. I went to a local assisted living facility here in Pittsburgh and asked them about that. And they go, oh, I would love that. Let's do that. And so I built it for them, right? One customer, right? And they loved it, by the way. The problem was there just weren't enough of them. And so once I got that one installed, then, where do I go next? What I did was I spent a lot of time, a lot of energy trying to convince other people that this problem was a big problem for them too. And it was a problem, but they were more interested in how do I get my next client to come in and impress the family with how nice my facility looks. Those were the things they cared about, which, by the way, is really all about marketing, which is what you're doing now. So the other way to fail is by having a teeny market size, which is kind of a little bit of what you were doing as well. So you and I have had the same experience in completely different industries, which is, I think, kind of part of the theme of our talk here. So I know we're almost. I told you we would run out of time real quick.
I know it goes by way too fast. Yeah.
I did want to. Sorry, what was that? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard a question. I did want to ask a follow-on question to one thing, though. You talked about, you kind of got into entrepreneurship, number one, a little bit out of necessity, and number two, because you saw your parents, you saw what it was like to run your own business. And I'm sure you had a perception of what that would be like. But you're 2 years into it now, so has it panned out to be what you expected it to be, and how is it different?
I graduated and I was like, I'm going to start a company. In 4 years, I'm going to exit and be financially free by like 24. And clearly, like, none of that has happened. So in that sense, not quite. But there are some things that have come true. I do have control over my time. It's nice that I can hop on this call at 1 p.m. and right after this, I'm going to eat all you can eat wings. So, having
Wow.
that kind of autonomy over my day, yeah, you should come, is really nice. So that part came true. I think there's a lot there's a lot more obstacles when you're an entrepreneur that kind of didn't come as or they weren't as clear to me going in. Yeah, you get a lot more control over your time, but also to wake up one day and have that sort of anxiety about how to best spend your time is a very weird thing, right? Like you have free time, you have time to pursue different ideas, and there's a million ways you could expand your company. But choosing like how to spend your time is a very weird thing, especially coming out of university where it's relatively structured. And kind of when you aren't in class and you do have free time, you're kind of at liberty to do literally whatever you want with it. Most people will come and enter a job where they're working 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, and it's a lot more structured. So having no structure is can be very difficult sometimes, for sure. But that part, I think for someone like me has been really nice because I think I'm quite an autonomous person and like quite a good self-starter. And I think you need to be in many ways, but I also think you can learn to be if you kind of have enough time. And the other thing as well is when you have a lot of time to work on something, but you aren't making any money, you get this like absolute driver behind you. Like you have this drive of necessity. Like I need to build something. I need to get something to work. And it pushes you, it pushes you more than you would if you were kind of in a more comfortable position. So yeah, definitely some great things about it that I've learned, definitely some, some difficulties that we're working through. But overall, the process has been, as you've alluded to, like you learn in a much more condensed amount of time. Like I learned in that kind of few weeks of market research, learned a year's worth of lessons in a matter of days. And I think there's something really, really exciting about that. Maybe to flip the question back to you, given that you've started a few different companies, you had MedSage, NewCare, SovaSage, what is kind of a pattern of learning that has followed you throughout those companies? Like after the third, fourth company, what's kind of been the thing that stood out to you the most that you've taken away, that you've learned from with regard to the entrepreneurial process, would you say?
That's a great question. So for me, it's about proving that your customer values what you're trying to do. And so getting to working with a live customer as early as possible, and not just like have them like say, oh, you're a good guy, I like what you're doing, but actually writing you a check, right? Paying you for what you're doing as quickly as possible is tremendously important. So for instance, with your business now, where you're doing digital marketing, you're providing a service, and you can get to that. And I'd love to explore that. But let me finish here. If you're doing a product, what that means is establishing an end experience for the customer that they're willing to pay for, even if everything behind it is just manual, incredibly inefficient, and losing money with every new customer that you bring on, right? It's getting to a product, and then once you've established and proved that value, then you can automate it and create scale, right? And by the way, that takes some money because you're going to lose money in the beginning. And that's why startups require investments. You've actually jumped on one here that may not, right? But a startup where you're building a company, you're going to lose money the first few years for sure, because you're following that path. But getting to that proof of concept, proof of value, is really important. So what does that do? That means that changes all your prioritization, right? You're not focused on, can I make money in the beginning? You have to be focused on, someday if I automate this, will I make money, right? That's important, obviously.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it's just what's a customer willing to pay for this? And by the way, the only way to really prove that is to get them to pay you for it.
Yeah.
They can say all they want. And so that forces a prioritization that's very different than a big company, right? I'm not worried about marketing. I'm not even worried about what my logo is and all that kind of stuff. I'm worried more about who do I start with? Will they pay me for this? And then, by the way, back to my NewCare story, are there enough people like that that I can actually build a company off of that, right?
Yeah.
And that when you start thinking about it that way, that changes what you think about when you get up in the morning, just like when we were talking about what our customers think about when they get up in the morning. And by the way, that's different based upon different companies. So your company you're doing now allows you to do that, right? Without doing that kind of investment upfront. Is that true?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So what I'm working on now is an agency model. So I'm basically doing freelance marketing projects for a few different clients and then subcontracting graphic designers and copywriters and things like that when I need them. So yeah, unlike a kind of SaaS business or a software company, which requires a ton of investment up front, 18 to 24 months of building before you even see your first pound come in, you make money in an agency from the first project that comes in. So it's inherently less scalable. Like you don't get that hockey stick curve that you get with, these massive software companies. But you do start to get money coming in from the beginning. And so it's a really great way to kind of go through this process of entrepreneurship and learn how to deal with clients and how to sell and how to get customers without kind of taking on all that risk early on, like you might get or you might have to do with a software company. But you're so right. I mean, I think a lot of us go into this thinking, okay, the goal of this is to make money as quickly as possible. That's why I'm doing it. But that can't be your priority, especially for those kinds of companies which you were alluding to. Like you have to focus on how do I get a customer? Well, first of all, what is the customer? How do I get that customer? Are there enough of said customer? And it's that distribution that we never think about. It's so easy to go in and build a product because we're excited about it and build, and forget that distribution is actually probably 90% of the battle. And you really don't want to push that off too much, because if you come out the building and you're on the other side and it's like, okay, now I got to sell this to people. How do you know you built the right thing? How do you know who to talk to? It just becomes incredibly difficult. And at that point, you probably run out of money anyway, so you're more likely to give up. So you're right. There's a lot of steps that kind of come before the money part, for sure.
Yeah, and you probably build the wrong product, right? You build what you think
rather
than what the customer thinks. So we haven't known each other this long, right? But I can tell already that you have all the ingredients to be good at sales. But had you done sales before this?
No, not really. I think I've always really enjoyed talking to people. I told you, like, my parents work in travel PR, and my dad used to say my mom just talks to people for a living. And he's not that wrong. She's really good at networking, and her value and her company's value is kind of in her network. And so, again, learned a lot from her. I've always been like super outgoing and I love meeting people. And so, yeah, I've never had sales experience. I still think there's a lot to work on there, but I do just really enjoy like learning from people and talking to people. So maybe that comes out.
I mean, that was, so my experience was, I can remember as an engineer, I would go to trade shows and I would go listen to the talks because I didn't want to go into the booth and talk to customers. Customers scared me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I learned
they're scary, man. Yeah.
They're scary, right? They might tell you they don't like what you're doing, right? On the other hand, once I started my own startup, I realized that if you take sales as just solving somebody's problem and address it exactly that way, I'm here to see if I can help you. If I can, I will. If I can't, then I'll stop wasting your time. Then a lot of the barriers go down, and then it becomes a lot of fun. For me, it was the biggest surprise out of being an entrepreneur was learning how to sell and learning how much I loved it. And I brought that question up because I think it's important for any students who happen to maybe be listening to us to understand that if you're going into entrepreneurship, you better get comfortable with sales. And so many universities in the US, and I bet it's probably true in the UK as well, like Carnegie Mellon doesn't have a single class that talks about how to sell. So I would incorporate it into my classes. I think sales ought to be a class that every student takes. And I don't mean just business student, every student, because you're always selling something. You're selling your next research project or whatever it is you're selling. And it's a skill that's really, really important. And it's a big part of being an entrepreneur. And you got
Absolutely
the makings to be really good at it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I think maybe you'd agree sales is kind of one massive like hospitality experiment. You're trying to make that customer feel as good as possible. And they say like everyone should work some sort of hospitality job at some point in their life. I worked at a summer camp for a couple of years. I did catering for a while. And it does kind of teach you just how to make that customer, whoever they are, just feel ultra appreciated. Because the happier they are and the more appreciated they feel, the more likely they're going to trust you and buy something from you. But I absolutely agree that they should be teaching more. St. Andrews, I did management and sustainable development as my degree. And we kind of dabbled in sales a little bit, but nothing to the extent that I wish we had done. And I haven't been to business school. I know you have, so maybe they do it more in business school, but
Not
I
really.
think as an undergrad, really, yeah, it shocks me. But it's
Yeah.
one of the best skills you can learn. So.
Yeah. Well, time check. It's 8:41 my time. So we've got about 19 minutes left. Kira, do we have any questions from the group?
Yeah, so I've got a couple from Paul to start with. So his first question is kind of more specifically moving towards the creative art side of things. So are there challenges for entrepreneurs which are specific to the creative arts? What would these be and how do you think they could be tackled?
Happy to give this one a go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing you'll find in the creative arts is that creative artists often don't have a lot of money. And selling to people who don't have as much disposable income and aren't as outwardly willing to buy your product is very difficult. So for me, selling to musicians who kind of already like musicians, let's be real, like we're all skint, right? It's very tough to make money as a musician unless you're incredibly famous. So trying to sell to a user group that is already kind of struggling in that regard and doing everything they can to kind of hold on to whatever they're making is very difficult. And so while the creative arts is a beautiful space and you're working with customers who are incredibly talented, incredibly gifted and excited about what they're doing, you do have to remember that it's not like selling to a massive private equity company that's splashing millions on the most random things, right? You do have to be way more acutely attuned to what people's needs are. But I do think it's greatly outweighed by the fact that, like I said, these people are awesome and they're all working on really cool things. And I think the pleasure, if you can kind of get around the difficulties with that, I think the pleasure of working with these kind of creative people is amazing and outweighs any challenges. Well, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I just add that I actually taught a class at CMU called Entrepreneurship for the Creative Arts. And one of the things that I themed in that class is that a lot of the issues are the same, whether it's creative arts or medical or STEM. The approaches are the same. It's really just what problem you're trying to solve and for who, right? I think you're right, though. I'm just sitting here listening to you. I mean, in the creative arts field, you're always looking in the beginning for those lead adopters. And I would suspect that group is going to be more open to innovation than, for instance, selling into the banking industry or something like that may be more conservative.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks,
I
guys.
agree.
Just quickly, another one from Paul here is, so Paul has had careers in creative arts. Typically, they experience creative problem solving and collaborating with a variety of people, but this can feel like an abrupt culture shift engaged with the entrepreneurship, which uses entirely different language and approach to failure, collaboration, or even the goals and outcomes. Do either of you guys have any sort of comment on this or any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world of entrepreneurship can have this kind of lingo and vocab that is a bit intimidating. Like we talk about SaaS companies and EBITDA and all these kind of random words that you don't even really need to be using. And I get the kind of fear of almost tainting like the creative industry with sort of this like ultra like talk. But you have to remember that like everything is a business when it comes down to it. And even the most creative creatives will need to make money somehow and will want to monetize their works somehow. And so despite there being this kind of apparent gap between like creativity in the creative industries and sort of entrepreneurship business stuff, I think you have to remember that people are a lot more open to talking about this stuff than you might realize. And I think there's a lot more crossover than you realize because everyone is trying to sell something and everyone is trying to build something. I think there's just a ton of crossover there. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but there's a lot of blur is what I would say.
Yeah, it can feel like a big jump between an expertise or a passion in a creative field and creating a business from that. that is something that you need to kind of invest in to get over, just to get comfortable with it, right? And one of the things I often suggest in situations like that, I mean, if you have the time, going and taking an entrepreneurship class from someone who's done it like Jake would be a great thing. But the other thing is just get involved with a company that might be working in a tangential area and learn from being involved in it, even if it's like just part-time, right? That exposure and I did that in my first, before I started my first company, I joined a startup. That startup failed. And I learned as much from what that company didn't do well as I did from what it did do well. But it was a tremendous learning experience. So look for opportunities like that. There is a gap there that you have to bridge, but there are ways to bridge it, either through education, reading, or just getting involved in a startup that's kind of tangentially associated with the space you're passionate about and learning from that, and then taking and applying those lessons learned.
Yeah, to add to your point about getting experience, I think the creative industry is a lot more fragmented. Like if you look at banking or consulting, it's kind of centralized in a few massive companies, really high barrier to entry, really hard to get informational interviews, really interact. But if you look at the creative space, there's thousands and thousands of, creative marketing companies, branding agencies, music management companies. I think there's a much lower barrier to entry for you to get experience and to get information. And you'll find that these people are lovely to talk to. And if you want to learn more about a particular creative industry, you can just send them, like cold email them, try cold calling them, knock on their door if you can, and just say, hey, my name is blank, I'm super interested in this. I had a few informational interviews like that when I thought I might want to go into music management, and learned a ton. So I think, yeah, super low barrier to entry, lots of small companies who might be willing to take you under their wing, or at least like have a conversation with you.
Now, you mentioned your mom is a good networker. Networking is a big part of it, right? And you were, by the way, networking when you got on your bike and rode around the bars in London. Like, I love that story.
Sure.
That's part of the process.
Yeah.
Perfect. Another question here we've got from Christine. So some people say you should never do your hobby as your job. So have you find that the responsibilities and effort of developing and running the business, learning other skills, have affected your actual passion and the joy that inspired you to start it in the first place? For example, for yourself, Jake, with being in the band and kind of that music.
Yeah, I mean, to speak about the band, I do tend to agree with that point to an extent. If I had given everything to the band this year and said, look, I'm going to do nothing else but play with this band and try to make it, I think I would have stopped enjoying it very quickly, because once you put all that pressure on a creative pursuit like that, it could stop being creative, it could stop being fun. Whereas this year, even when I was working on the music app, that was still very much different from my band commitments. And now when I play gigs with my band in London every once in a while, it's like a really nice reason to get together and play a gig. And yeah, we might get a few £100, but that's not like the central point of it. The issue is if we had done that full time, the central point would have been, can we make a living from this? And then I think it kind of dilutes the passion you have for it. That being said, again, to use like my parents as an example, they love travel and they live and breathe it, and they get to work in that industry every day. So they're probably not doing their exact hobby every single day, which is traveling, but they get to kind of be surrounded by people who love it. So maybe that's the middle ground, is try not to make your exact hobby your job, because you might grow to hate it if you're putting too much financial reliance on it. But try to do something adjacent to it, because by surrounding yourself with people who are really interested in the same things you are, I think you're going to be inspired.
Yeah, I'll just add, and I'll actually be a little bit contrarian here. I actually disagree with that comment about don't make your hobby your job, right? If you're going to do something that you're passionate about, it's probably also going to be your hobby, because that's why it's your hobby. And yeah, okay, maybe you become oversaturated with it, but frankly, those are the businesses that are successful, where you've got somebody with a vision to do something big in a certain area that they love, and they're determined to make it happen. And so I fundamentally disagree with that premise. You should make your hobby your job. You make your hobby your job and you'll never work a day in your life, right? So do it.
To play devil's advocate, Will, do you worry that there is a risk of tainting that hobby by making it a job? Or do you think it's worth just saying, look, I'm going to do this and being passionate about the work. Do you think there's any risk there? Do you think people should just go for it?
I think they should go for it. I think they should go for it. I have this saying that I use with my kids, which is I don't live my life based upon fear, right? I'm not going to fear that ruining that passion. I'm going to dive headlong into it, right? And that's just something I believe to my core. And you know, if you make your passion your daily mission, I mean, how do you go wrong with that, right? I mean, the difference is you have to make sure you don't quit, right? You have to be flexible and adapt. Your vision may not be the right vision, but as long as you're working on that passion, it'll be fun. That's what I believe.
Yeah, there's something to say about putting your passion to the test like that and really stress testing it under the the forces of business. I think it'd be quite an interesting experiment, and you might even find that by making it your life and your business, you actually delve into a deeper level of that passion that you didn't even know existed. And I think there's no way you would do that and then think, oh, I wish I hadn't. Like, I think the chance of, now I'm thinking about the chance of regretting putting everything into your passion to try and make it your life and your business. Like, I think the benefits of that greatly outweigh any potential downsides.
I would agree. Yeah. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. So I guess one question from me would be, so you've both talked about following your passions into entrepreneurship. If you could both go back to the beginning of your journey, is there one thing you would do differently, or is there even one risk that you're really glad that you took?
Well, I mean, I'll start, and then Jake, you can jump in. I don't really regret any of the things that I did. So I talk about the fact that I've done 4 startups. What I don't talk about, and I actually gave a talk on this once to a bunch of governors in the States here, is all the ideas that I explored and then didn't go forward with, some of which some other people took and built companies off of, right? And you might say every one of those things was a lost opportunity. You might even label them failures because I didn't go forward with them. And I would tell you that every single one of those was a stepping stone to the things that I did succeed with. So to me, it's all a process. The good and the bad, the successes and the failures all get you to where you are today, and where Jake will be in 10 years, you can't even imagine, right? Because he's taken those steps and he's learning from each one of them. And so I don't regret a single piece of it.
Yeah, I think you can't regret it. Like, as you said, all those negatives really are the best learning experiences, and you absolutely learn more from failed experience and successful ones. I think I don't regret much, and obviously I'm not super far in the journey. But there are a few companies I started before the music business, or like somewhat simultaneously. One of them was like a student tutoring company, especially for Americans who were thinking about studying abroad, was kind of helping them through that process. And the other one was, this was in my first year at St. Andrews, I started like a print-on-demand t-shirt company, of kind of like surf-inspired St. Andrews apparel. And both, again, like did very little market research, I plunged into it, did all the things I now say not to do. But I wish I had at least seen those through a bit more. I think I had a tendency to give up pretty quickly if things weren't growing in the way that I wanted. Luckily, Klank I gave 3 years to, and I think that was the right amount of time. But yeah, I wish I had just kind of given a bit more time to it, especially for you guys who are at St. Andrews. Like, obviously, you need to prioritize your degree, and you need to go out and meet people and engage in the school. And it's like truly the most amazing place to go to university in the world. But you also have a ton of time to try things. And so definitely don't give up immediately if things don't work. So that I proved with the music business as well. If something doesn't work in St. Andrews, it might work elsewhere. Also, if something does work in St. Andrews, it might not work elsewhere, but you don't know unless you try. And so you really need to give it just a little bit more time than you think it deserves, I'd say.
You know, interesting thing about that, Jake, for years, I haven't done it recently, I guess because I'm so involved in this business that I'm doing now, but I had a notebook and I would write down ideas all the time, right? And some of them I would come back to, right? So just because you didn't pursue that surfing business, which I'm imagining the surfing business in St. Andrews, which is like in full parka,
Yeah.
I was swimming in those
Beanie and
jumped off
gloves.
the pier, by the way.
Oh, nice.
It would be a specialty surfing experience. But anyway, you may come back to those, right? And there's nothing that stops you from coming back to those.
No, it's true. The biggest regret I think could be is if you have a great idea, you start to build it, and then 5 years later, someone else has built it and become incredibly successful, and you're like, like I wish I had just done it. But obviously, there might have been a ton of reasons why you building it, might not have worked in this other person building it. Maybe they had more money or better connections in the space or something. Yeah. But I do think if you have an idea and the timing seems right, like why not pull the trigger and just do it.
I've had that happen to me many times in my career. Well, I mean, it's kind of goes with the territory, frankly, because good ideas, in my opinion, are a marriage between a customer problem and a new. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's process, or maybe it could even be political changes, right? That intersect and create an opportunity. And if that happens in a space, there's lots of smart people. So there's probably a Jake at Edinburgh, right? That's thinking the same thing, right? And so you're always going to have more than one person going after a problem. And in some ways, it's confirmation that this is a real opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's true. And one thing you've just made me think of, and this kind of goes back to the question of making your hobby your passion. A podcaster who I really like once talked about this, how the one way to ensure that people aren't going to take your ideas, people aren't going to build things faster than you, and most importantly, that you're in kind of a market of one, as in there's no competition, is to build something that is like the purest output of who you are as a person. Because there will be people who are as smart as you, if not smarter than you, who are building similar things and have more knowledge in a particular area, but they're never going to be you. And so as cliche as it sounds, if you build the purest output of who you are, how can you have any competition, really? And that really stuck with me, because now whatever I build, I want it to be this kind of pure reflection of me. And it also helps to market it, because who better to market a product that is the purest reflection of you than you, right? It comes so easy at that point.
Yep. It's so very true. And I'll tell you that never stops too, right? So my current business was very innovative when we first introduced it. And we've probably got 3 companies that I swear all they do is look at what we do and try to copy it. But as long as we're always moving forward as rapidly as possible, they'll never catch us, right? So that mentality never changes as you build a company.
Yeah, just got to outrun them. That's the goal.
Yep. Speed. Another difference between a big company and a startup. They have all the resources. We have speed and agility, right?
It's so much more important. Yeah.
Great. I think one nice question to end on would just be, for both of you, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's looking to enter into the entrepreneurial space?
I'll start, and I'll make it really simple. Just take that first step, right? It's the same thing that I experienced when I was driving back from Florida and saying, was this just a fun intellectual exercise, or am I really going to do this and change my life, right? And in the end, I had to kind of let go of that fear of failing. And that is something that everybody has to go through. And so take that first step is my piece of advice.
Yeah, it's super simple and very true. To build off that, my piece of advice would be to talk to as many people as possible. And I think this is a good piece of advice, whether you're going into entrepreneurship or looking for a job. How are you going to know what is out there if you don't talk to people? You could have a 20-minute interview with someone and learn almost everything you need to know to make a decision about going into that industry, or more importantly, know to never go anywhere near that industry ever again, right? It's the most beautiful way of getting someone's entire life and career's worth of information distilled down to like 20, 30 minutes. So the way to do that, I would say, is go on LinkedIn, find alumni. As far as I've found, St. Andrews alumni are super happy to chat. I would be super happy to chat. Will is an honorary alumnus, and I'm sure he'd be super happy to chat. But yeah, just go out and say like, hey, I would love to chat with you about XYZ. I go to St. Andrews. I think people will respond really well to it. only by like really upping that sample size of how many people you speak to are you going to have any idea what to do. And it's going to really help you make an informed decision about what you might want to build, what industry you might want to go in, what mistakes you might be able to catch early on, and kind of a whole number of other things that you wouldn't expect.
Great answer.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that's a great place to end. So I'd just like to say thank you to both Will and Jake for joining us today and for sharing your experience, your knowledge. It's been a huge help for everyone in the room today.